Hello and welcome to another Soul Horse Sunday. Today's conversation is with Kate Neligan, and she has a business called Awakening with Equines, and her life seems to be dedicated to the spirit of the horse, honoring the horse and the role they fulfill in her spiritual life. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name is Kate, as you mentioned, and I'm an equine-partnered life and business coach and animal communicator, healer, speaker, and author. And as you mentioned, it is dedicated. I'm passionate about the power of the human-animal bond and what really happens in the transformation that's possible for both beings, especially with the horse-human heart connection.
So in your life, did you know from how did you come to understand that horses were connected with your spiritual life? Were you always born knowing that? Was it something that happened that brought this to light with you?
Well, it's interesting. So I used to be an atheist, and I was not at all. I was a scientist. My goal was to be a veterinarian. I've always loved animals and I always wanted to help them. I just didn't know that they could show up as healers and coaches and be therapeutic, because I was always riding and I was competing, and I was very much in that old paradigm of, what we do with horses for us, right? And I luckily had a wake-up call with one of my first mentors. She was doing essentially equine therapy with addicts in recovery and rehab in California. And I learned about what one of my friend's horses was doing with these participants. And I was like, I need to see this. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And the first time I sat in, my mouth was dropped open for 2 hours straight, because I watched people come in really disconnected from themselves and their lives and not in their bodies, with no hope. And in 2 hours be lighter, freer, happier, connected. And horses were just at liberty with us in an arena, being able to just show up the way they wanted. So they put their head on someone's heart. And I just was like, this is incredible. I had no idea this entire world of horses existed, because no one had ever introduced me to it. And I was never doing anything but equestrian stuff. So that was my first aha moment. And then I went, okay, what is in this? And so I was an apprentice for 2 years, and I watched and I absorbed, and I was like a sponge, and I learned a lot. But I knew that for me to do this work with humans, I had to put myself through it. So I just spent day after day with this special horse at the time, just learning from her and listening to her and seeing what she had to teach me. And I had a lot of unlearning to do, a lot of ways of being that weren't working. And luckily at that time, I had just recently graduated from a master's program in spiritual psychology. So I was able to really pair like those learnings and teachings with what the horses were really bringing forward. So that's when it all kind of started, which was about 9 years ago.
Okay, so interesting. You said you're an atheist before, but then you met the horses and it kind of opened a new avenue to explore. And then you had a degree in spirituality and psychology. So did you enroll in that spirituality course before you knew the horses? Was it just part of your training? You were just interested in why people thought there was spirituality? How did that work with the horses? How did that coincide?
Well, it's interesting because even though I was an atheist, my mom is like was for many years, like in charge of, or the director of the Metaphysical Center of New Jersey. So there was metaphysics always. There were, people coming to my house and oming and meditating and having these. And so I was interested, but more on the paranormal side. Like I was interested in anything like about past lives. I could see apparitions when I was young, and I just shut down a lot of my gifts. I was clairaudient when I was young. I just shut it all down. And so what happened is, I guess in my early 20s, I went through a bad breakup, and I realized that I had to really do some personal growth work. And so I went to therapy in my early 20s, and I found Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life book and the whole mind, body, spirit connection. And that put me into the whole Hay House world. And then I was just like a sponge for all of the Hay House authors and reading and attending lectures. And so I was deep into personal development and come my mid-20s. And then I went and got my master's program in spiritual psychology with still a little bit of skepticism and some old, type A ways of working in the world. But and then when I graduated, it's really interesting because our second year project, they say, pick something you really love and want to do. And we had a process where they had us talk to our inner child, and mine was go ride, go back to the horses. And I had taken about 10 years off in my 20s from the horses. I had had them since I was 10. And but I was working in New York City, and then I didn't have access is really what a lot of it was. And so what was really neat was that a woman 2 doors down from me inside of the movie studio where I was working at the time, she had a picture of a horse up. And one day I got brave and I went in and I said, "Is that your horse?" And then that opened up this whole new world because I found my first mentor through her, and I essentially started leasing through her. And so they came back to me. And then when I graduated, it was like, I decided I wanted to commit more to the horses. So I was full in at that time, leasing and riding and volunteering in equine therapy. So that's how that all coincided. But it was an interesting timeline because I did have about 10 years. Now I look back, I go, how did I go 10 years without horses? Like, I just don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I went about 8 years without horses, and I look back and go, how did that ever happen? It looks like my thing is puzzling out again, but you can still hear me, right?
I can hear you, but you froze.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what's up with it. So basically the horses then actually maybe awakened the part of your spirituality. You had studied it in your head and in your philosophy, but they actually brought it down into your body and in your heart and your soul.
Oh, completely. I mean, horses are, in my opinion, the most spiritual beings on the planet. It's like the only thing I can compare them to is what probably the yogic masters used to be like, where you used to go, or monasteries, you go in and you're quiet and you get transmissions and the energy is there. I feel like we haven't had a lot of, or at least I don't know a lot of people that studied with yogic masters in this lifetime, right? Where you're doing yoga for long hours. But for me, I feel like that's what it reminds me of when I'm with them, is I'm in either a monastery outside, right? Or I'm in some form of like spiritual gym where my entire system is getting reorganized. Every time I'm with them, I'm either crying, something's moving in my body, I have ideas and inspiration. Like they just activate so much of the spiritual energy is, I think. So.
Right. Yeah, horses are what I think it's Joseph Campbell that talked about returning to your sacred space. And for me, nature has always been my temple, but the horses are what actually bring me more internal to my sacred space within my own self, is the horses. And they're the ones that keep me reminded of how important it is and how much more there is to do. Nature feeds me, and it's where I go to like absorb the energy from. I'm outside a lot, but the horses are actually the ones who do bring it a little more home for me. And because I channel with horses or in other animals too, but horses is my passion. I just know they have so much information to share, and they too have so many horses. I read for horses that struggle with fear and lives that they don't want, just like humans do. But when we are connected with our own horses and we're honoring them the best that we can, and we truly connect with them, what I call like the equestrian namaste, to where that we namaste with each other, it helps get me out of my head and my ego, and I'm better able to hear what input they have for me during the time that we're together. So how did this first show up in your life? You said you had a special horse. It sounds like it wasn't yours, but you had a special horse and then you moved into getting your own. I think you have your own horses now.
I do. Yeah. It honestly started with this really cool story with this horse named Butterfly, who I manifested through some really interesting circumstances. But she got me back into riding and had me like fall in love with horses again in my late 20s, I think it was. And then I found this other horse, Felici, that I leased, who was incredible. And we only had her for 2 years before she passed to melanoma. And that just opened up like a big portal. Like grief is such a big awakening that I went through that. And then right after, I ended up finding this incredible horse who just was there at the ranch and not being ridden, and because she had some physical issues and she just wanted to do this work so bad. So we found each other, and I rescued her because they were going to put her down because she wasn't being used. And she's one of the best healers I've ever met. Most of my current gifts of being able to work with the horses, either on the healing or communication side, all come from her. I feel like I got a lot of them before she left, and then a lot of them after she passed. So I had her for a few years. And then I had a couple years where I didn't have my own horses. And now I have two that are so different, but teach me every day a lot about myself. And a lot of it is bridging, because they're two very different parts of me that I've had to really see and accept in these two horses. So.
Okay, when you say bridging, you mean?
Just integrating like different, like I was thinking about it last night when I was mucking, like even just integrating like soul energy and ego energy. Because one of my horses, I always say horses don't really have egos, but one of my horses has more ego than I've met in other horses. And so I'm in that place where I see some of my ego or shadow side in her. And so it's a lot of like forgiveness and embracing it and being okay with it and neutralizing it. Whereas my other horse is so much more like soul energy and angelic energy. And so it's like they are both of me. And how do I integrate them and love them and be whole instead of like pushing these parts of myself away?
Right. I know a lot of people believe that all horses are transcended and they're masters and all that. But in my experience with my readings, a lot of horses struggle, just like humans do. And a lot of it is because of their environment, how they've been passed around or how they've been treated. But I think that horses are horses, humans are humans, but we have so much in common. And part of that, I'm going back to the ego. I think some horses do have a lot of ego, and maybe they've been taught to bring that out of them, like if they're only used for competition. If they're only used for this one thing, I think that they can have some ego. And I don't think the ego is always bad. I think our ego can serve a huge purpose as humans. And I think it can really serve a purpose in horses too. But also it can be a reflection, like you're talking about, is what part of myself, like when you're talking about the shadow, my bay mare, Enchantress, who's like sent me over the top with having to relearn things in a different way and accept things in a different way. She refused shoes. She had one shoe put on and she stood perfectly still. And then she went, nah, not for me. And there was no getting any more shoes on her. And
Wow.
she has she's got white feet with thin soles, and I've used supplements and she's flat footed. She needs some kind of support and I can't keep boots on her. So it really brought out she brought out my shadow, because I was terrified. What if I can't fix this? She's got to have hoof protection. We cannot keep boots on because she's got a big stride and we like to trot, and we just mostly do trail, but she can just really power down the trail. And the boots go flying off or they break, and I'm buying new gaiters every other day for, $60 a gaiter or whatever.
Right.
So I was really, really afraid of what's going to happen if I can't fix this. She loves to go out on the trail, but if she's not going to have shoes, can't keep boots on, it really caused me to dig deeper into my shadow side, going back into my past, my youth and my life, on all the things that I was afraid I couldn't fix. Horses have such a way of bringing out those things that we fear the most. Yes. And we can either fear it through them or we can walk into the shadow with them. And there's such illumination within the shadow that once we embrace that, then we have so much more access. It's sometimes, I wrote a blog one time about the heart can see in the dark. So when we go into the shadow with our horses, there's still so much sight there and insight that comes from that.
It's so true. It's so true. And I didn't realize that I had a shadow piece that was so connected to my horse until one day. She doesn't want to share this like large barn shelter with I call her sister. They're not related, Bo's Salita. She doesn't want to share it. This is Phoenix, my pain. And one night I was like, I just had this, it just came flowing out of me. And I said, just because something comes into our space doesn't mean that it's going to take anything from us. Doesn't mean that it's going to hurt us. And then I saw her like lick and chew, and then I went, oh God, I have that too. And then I went to my clearing statement of like, let's clear the energy around this, of like how this is a misunderstanding. Like, let's do the forgiveness work, let's do the clearing. And she's been sharing the barn ever since. And I'm like, that's so cool to me, because, and I realized I had that too, which is like, like, do I really want someone right in my space? And what do I'm going to have to give up, because freedom is such a big value. So it really made me realize like, oh yeah, we were both holding on to that. And that's something we can let go of. It's just a misunderstanding. So
Interesting, but they are there sending invitations. Whatever challenge they give us, they're sending us invitations to see it a different way. Absolutely see it a different way.
Totally. Yeah, I've been in about a 3-week darker shadow period with Phoenix, because she choked and I really freaked out. I've seen her choke before, but not like this. I was there for 6 hours working on her and trying to pull her out, and I was exhausted. And she does this every time before I take a trip. And she knows I'm going away. She's done it different things each time, where she like hurts herself. And I'm like, I have to go to Los Angeles and see clients, knock it off, right? So now I'm like, I'm not telling you until I get to LA next time. Like, I'm not telling you I'm leaving. But she did it, and it really brought up a lot of like fear of death, fear of my own death, fear of her death. And like, that's not something we always talk about, and like, but I know to a certain degree, we all have it. It's just how much we have it. And I've lost horses. So it's still, and I lost my cat in 21, and who was like my child. And I definitely still have that fear. And so she's really been working with me. She said it to me right after I got her. She said, you have to be less afraid to lose things. And I'm like, oh, you're right. Yeah. And so, but for the last couple of weeks, it's like, I've had all these dreams about death, and I've been really, and I'm like, oh, this is so dark. I just want to have a good 2023, right? Like, but yes, it's like I think she's trying to show me like, exactly. I love what you said. Your heart can see in the dark. Like, it's like, okay, she wants me to really move some of this out, right? Move some of the old, because I think a lot of it too is just like some stuck trauma from watching these animals pass, in the past, and like, and knowing that death is a part of life. And I know that. And so one of my friends always say, we die every day. And like, just, can you get to that place? Like, it's okay that we do. And I'm like, yeah.
Right.
But she's working me right now. I'm in it. I'm definitely, I haven't talked about it with really anyone. You're the first person I'm sharing this with, but I'm in it. So
yeah, it's interesting how deep they will take us. And they do teach us to not fear the shadow so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me just look at a few things here. What are some ways? Okay, well, actually, we just covered a lot of that. It was kind of a blanket statement, but what are some exact ways if you feel like your horse, well, that was one. Okay, what about your other horse, Salida? That's not as proactive, maybe not as loud. How does she show up in ways that she's inviting you to look at something more spiritual that she needs, that's more in her spiritual life or in your life? What are some ways that she shows up to do that? How would she signal you or invite you?
Yeah, thank you. So she is my more angelic. Her name means slice of heaven. Salida means that. She was not the track thoroughbred. She was a broodmare. She's a lot like my horse Lindsay, who passed. They look exactly the same, heal exactly the same. And her big things are around helping me to trust and to soften. So she'll invite me in by like coming up and just like standing next to me, like, I'm here with you. Like, I'm a shoulder for you to cry on. I'm a shoulder for you in general. She loves softer, sweeter, like brushing and touching. Like, she loves the sweetness and the softness, and she really wants women to get into those spaces. So, or even men. And like, she did something recently with a client where she just put her head right over this guy's head, and it was so clear. And I said, what are you feeling? And he's like, I have to get out of my head more. Like, I really need to be in my heart more. And I'm like, yeah. I'm like, and he's like, that's so hard for me. And then he's like, I didn't even know horses could be like this, because he had only ever ridden. And he was like, I can feel what she's doing. And I'm like, yeah, she's doing the energy activation. And there's lots of words for it. But I just think she invites in through that way of being, like telling people, you can be more like me. I'm really tall, I'm really powerful. And I'm also really soft and really sweet and gentle. And so, the other day we had horses leave the ranch, and I'm always attached to all the horses. And so I was a little sad. And there was also a mom and baby that were separated, and it definitely brought up some stuff for me. So I thought I was going there to be there for my horses, and I was, but I also didn't know I needed their support. And so Salita just stood with me, and she'll put her face up next to mine, and she let me just hug her and hold her for a while. And her and I have both we've had horses leave our lives. And so we share in the grief. So one day the horses said to me, if you're clearing something for a human, clear for all of us, because we all share these similar issues. She shares grief. I know she does, and she's more I can tell too, her way of grieving is she'll just walk off into the pasture and eat and try to not ignore it, but just self-soothe or deal with it. Whereas Phoenix is goes into hypervigilant and is what's going on? And how do I change it? And what do I, she gets so controlling. But so I was Salita, I just stood there and I'm yeah, this is hard, and we can be in it together. And, so that's how she is. She's just different.
And it was a great, when you said that she's big, tall, and powerful, but she's soft. And what came to mind is she has all this power and strength, but for humans to look at is I have all this power and strength, and I'm soft and I have nothing to prove. Because as humans, we have so much to prove. When we finally get to the place of stability, then we have so much less to prove.
Yeah.
Okay, let me look here and see if there's any questions that we haven't generally covered here, the things that I wanted to talk about. So okay, one thing that I think that horses are really good at helping humans with is forgiveness. We have to forgive them. And, sometimes if we think we're doing the right thing with our horse and they're giving us supposedly all the wrong answers, it's really a time that we have to step back, and because we can get angry with them because there's a danger of getting hurt. There's all different things that can show up by them being resistant. So what is something that you feel how do you think your horses help you to forgive? And the reason I ask these questions is a lot of people that watch the conversations aren't really that soulfully involved with their horse. And so I like to point out ways that they can look for signs within their horse that the horse is offering them something else.
I love that. Yeah. So my first forgiveness story was, I was with my horse, Lindsay, in California, and I had a lot of thoughts. The monkey mind was going. I had a lot of just my brain was nonstop, and she wanted nothing to do with me. She was on the other side of the arena, and I was come on, let's do this and let's do this, and write all my own agenda. And she was just no. And it brought up some stuff in me around rejection and not feeling connected, and why doesn't my horse love me? All these things. So I walked to the side, sat by the fence, closed my eyes, and just ran forgiveness. And we're taught forgiveness in my master's program. There's a whole class on self-forgiveness, because they say you don't necessarily need to forgive anyone else. You just forgive yourself for the judgments you have of something or the misunderstandings you have of something. So I forgive myself for judging myself as unlovable. And I was just running it for 5 minutes or however long it was. And it was just my inner process, and I was just doing my work, and boom, I look up and she's standing right over me, just with her head connected and right there breathing with me, good job, keep going. So that was my first fun forgiveness story.
Awesome. So are there any specific, well, you've actually mentioned quite a few already, it's just kind of rolled along here. You've got all the questions answered, specifics on ways that they show up. How do you feel that our spiritual journey as humans affects the horse? Meaning, if we go out with the intention of, I need some spiritual answers, because I do this, and most of the time it takes me somewhere I don't expect to go with them. And sometimes I feel like they've shut me out. And I often look at that on are they just not up for this today? Because they're just like us. Some days you're just not into it. You might try, but you've had enough. You've had other things on your own to deal with. Or sometimes I think they're telling me to stop being so spiritually needy, because I can be that way. I get obsessed by it. or sometimes they're telling me to stop having so many questions and just be more involved in the process, or just accept the process. How do you think that when you go to your horses for a spiritual solution, how do you think it affects them? Do they always reply, or they do like mine and sometimes they say, you just need to deal with this on your own?
I love this question. So they will take turns, my girls, sometimes where they're like, I've got Kate today. And then, so they kind of switch on and off with me, which is fun. If they're not answering, I usually know it's something I have to do with my own guides, which does include the Heaven Herd, which I have like 18 horses that I've worked with that are on the other side. So one of them will usually be available to talk to me if one of my living horses is not. Or sometimes I know I need my goats, honestly. Like sometimes I just go to my goats and we just cuddle and hang out. And whatever I was worried about or concerned about, it's gone. I don't even remember what it was, because the goats are like, life's good, Kate. Like, what, and that's their answer. But yeah, I mean, I had never thought about spiritually needy. I love that. I do go through phases when and my friends have shared this too, where it's like, I can't read another personal development book. Can't watch another class. I just don't, I can't. I'm like, I don't care about
what if this is as good as it gets?
Exactly. Like my life, I'm not improving. I'm just not gonna improve this week. Like we're good. Right?
Really, I've only got this far.
Yeah. It's like, and we're good. No, I'm like you, I like geek out on it too, but there are times when I'm like, we're gonna plateau, and the plateau's fine. Like nothing needs to change or happen right now. So I think, I don't know if I ask my horses a lot of questions. Sometimes they just give me answers without me realizing maybe I was asking a question somehow. But what they will do is they will push me into things when it's time, when I'm ready. And I'm not always expecting it. Like I will have weird healings and things happen with them that I'm like, okay, didn't plan for that today. Didn't really have time for that today, but I've been here for an hour crying. So good. Like it's that kind of stuff. So I just know like to be open to the unexpected is kind of a piece of it, which being a double Capricorn, I'm like, no, I need a plan. I need to, right. I'm like, oh, like they've helped me surrender so much. So, but yeah, such a good question. And I think like it's not being attached to having to get something from them, because usually the magic happens when we're not even expecting something to happen. And that's usually like, I love when my clients come and their intention is, I'm just open. I don't have any expectations. I don't need anything. And I'm always like, yes, this is going to be the best session, because that's when I think the horses work best, is through that energy. That's been my experience, at least.
So I want to go back to, you said Heaven Herd. I referred to mine as a spirit herd. And I think this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I have found it to be tremendously helpful. My horse, Eli, that passed over a few years ago, and I didn't recognize it at his death, at his passing, but his name was Eli. I was his 10th home in 9 years. He'd been named many things. But his registered name, I tracked down every owner. His registered name was True North. And that is actually how I changed the name of my business from what it was to the True North, to my True North Equestrians. And it was because he had been pushing on me. He had died of founder, and I couldn't believe I couldn't save him. I couldn't believe that I couldn't save him. I mean, there was no reason for him to founder. So he was in great health. The vet had just been there, and like 2 days later, he can't walk. So I was just stunned and shell-shocked by the whole thing, guilty about not being able to do it. Did I let him suffer too long? I mean, how long? Founder is horrible with horses, as all horse owners know. And he just, every time I would think about him, I would start to cry. So I just put it out of my sight because I didn't want to cry. I felt like there was unfinished business, and I didn't want to go through more grief or guilt about it. So I just put it aside. But one day I just made what I call an answer quest. It's kind of like one of those maps that they do on the police board, all of that. And I put him in the middle. And then for some reason, I put his registered name. And I actually realized he's been trying to get in touch with me this whole time about my business. So now I call him my CEO of the business. and I do channel with him about things. So, but before then, I didn't even consider communicating with horses that has passed. Now I do it with all of them that I've had, as well as ones that I've known that I've had in other lifetimes. I call them the great herd, the great spirit herd. But what are your thoughts on how a spirit herd, how the importance and how people can access them? Like for me, I channel, that's what I do. And then I just also, because I'm claircognizant, I just get that information. But if people don't know that they're like that, which by the way, anybody can be any of the clairs. We're all into telepathy. We can all do this. It's not some special thing. It just matters if you're agreeable to being that way. So how do you think are some ways that people can acknowledge spirit herds and how they would influence their life?
Yeah, I love it. Good question. I feel like there's like two layers of spirit herds. There's the horses that you have personally known or been with that have been a part of your path and your journey. And then there's the greater, as you said, great spirit herd, or what I call the horse ancestors, which is any and all horse that's lived here on earth that's available that wants to help. So I think there's two also ways to potentially talk with them. One is specifically for if you have an equine business, which a lot of us do, and to ask for support and to help, because so my prayer is always, please let me honor the horses. I set that intention before this talk. Please, please guide me as to ways I can help you and be a voice for horses in general, right? Because my whole thing is we got to respect horses more. We've got to see them as more than just like motorcycles that people jump on. Like you know what I mean? Like we have to grow this awareness so that they're more protected. There's better, all of it, from wild horses to domestic, and so I just always set an intention. And so I'll often say, show me how I can help you, show me what I can do. And then ideas come in. And so then you get to say, this is for me, or this is for someone else, right? I can do this or I can't. That's how the card deck came to me, because they were like, Kate's open, do it. It took me forever. But that's how the Awakening with Equines card deck came. One day they said, write down the 40 things we teach. And I just couldn't write fast enough. And these qualities came out. And then it took a while. And then they guided me to the artist, and they, so it's really for them, so I find that's both the heaven herd and the horse ancestors at large, and my living horses. They all have a say in that deck. They're all in the deck. There's specific horses in there. So ultimately, I think it comes through asking for guidance around your business, because they want to help. And they want to help the mission of the horses and as a species get better for all horses. So have a heartfelt intention on that. And the other is for you personally, right? Is what is it that you need or want to be inspired by? One of my friends has dreams about the horses, right? Or I've heard a Pono visit someone in a dream state, and that. I just think that's so cool. If I'm having a hard time with one of my horses, I will literally ask the heaven herd, hey, can you talk with this horse?
Yeah.
Right? I'll ask for guidance on different things, where do I find the best, whatever product, or, so I think there's just ways that they can be a guidance system and be there to keep you connected. Also, for those people who don't have horses, the heaven herd, the horse ancestors are there for anyone. People come to me sometimes and they're like, I keep having dreams about horses, so I need to be around them. And I'm like, awesome. Or people will say, my therapist said I really need to try this equine coaching thing. And I'm like, great. So the horses are coming in to anyone that's open because they know that certain people need them. That's my belief, at least,
Right. Now, there's a term I use about gather the horses. I feel like the horses are gathering spiritually and physically in this new, and I don't want to say it's a movement, but this new awakening with how people are starting to see equines. And I mean, I know that overall we're a small percentage of the whole equine world, but there is so much more awareness now about the soul of the horse and about the gifts that they bring and how they can actually bring so much healing and stability into our lives, whether we have torment or whether our everyday lives or whatever, but their healing is really starting to be accepted and become mainstream. I think it's the fastest form of therapy right now. Is equine assisted therapy is the fastest growing therapy right now. And a lot of that is attributed to the veterans, the success they've had with the veterans, which brings a little more publicity, which is fabulous. And then, of course, the handicapped children, the writing there. So yeah, I do think that we are starting as a collective to start to acknowledge horses and what they contribute a little bit more, which is much needed. And the horses are now that they're starting to understand that they can be heard, they're starting to speak more. It's starting to become more obvious.
Yes, for sure. And I also find too, they're doing more healing work if people are open. So like one of the things my mare, Lindsay, taught me was, because I was always petting and brushing and trying to like, touch and talk to her that way. And one day she was like, just put your hands open and receive. So I'm like, what? And I stood there with my hands like next to my side with my arms open. And that's when she went in and showed me what horses do on the healing space and like how she started to clear different chakras or different pain points. And she kept putting her nose up and either, moving her nose around it or pulling energy, doing all the beautiful energy work. And I had no idea horses could do that. Like I wasn't aware, I wasn't allowing it. And she taught me how to receive that. And so now I will say that to, and when I work with often women who own horses, the same thing, like, can you just be and receive from your horse for a minute and see if they want to contribute? And they're like, oh my God, I feel this and that. And I'm like, great. So it's like they're talking more, but I think they're also doing more energy work for those that know how to. And it's funny, if I meet a horse for the first time and I do that, they're like, oh, you know this thing? And I'm like, yeah. And then they start doing it and everyone's like, but they're in your space. I'm like, yeah, but they're not trying to hurt me. Like they're not hurting me. Watch and see if you can feel what's actually going on,
Yeah, I was going to mention that because I mentioned this in other sessions too, because a lot of people use horses for chakra healing. And as humans, we have to learn to discern. I mean, because personal space, we don't want to get stepped on. It hurts a lot when you get stepped on by a horse. You don't want your ankle chipped. You don't want your shoulder, them hit you with your shoulder and knock you over. But there's such a difference when we become more aware of what our personal space is, what our boundary space is versus inviting them into our space. And I think the difference is that when we're not familiar with horses that are trying to interact with us on more of a healing level, we have to kind of detach from everything that we've known as far as the rules of horses and just see what they're really trying to do with us. And at the same time, be safe. So I understand sometimes until you actually experience more of horses coming into your space in more of a helping way instead of I need your attention way or will you listen way, it takes a little bit of practice to discern all of that. So discernment is really important. But if humans become aware that the horses may be acting a little bit different or they're persistent about something, instead of just saying, I know so many people that would just get back, you're in my space. And it's not being respectful. However, that is disrespectful, but the horse is not being disrespectful when they're asking for you to cooperate with them a little bit more. But we have to look for the signs as humans. We have to be willing to make a change and look for the signs and be open to those invitations.
Completely. Totally. Yes. I agree. Yeah.
Was there anything else you want to say about your horses, the journey, the spirituality, anything maybe that stands out to you?
It's interesting because I always find too that so horses are always evolving and awakening like we are, right? And like they are, some of them are struggling and some of them are not. And there's different levels that they're at. And what's interesting is my mare Phoenix started to do something new recently with clients. And at first I went, oh man, like my first thought was this is bad. But then she was like, just wait and listen. And it took me a minute, but essentially we had like a team building and people were coming up and just trying to touch her face. Like touch her face, touch her. She's beautiful, right? And people want, and I found it even when I started working with addicts in early days, everyone wanted to touch the horse. And it was, I need this majestic spiritual being. I'm not that. This being is that. And so they would almost like grab to it. And, a lot of horses like put up with it. But she was doing this thing where she would pin her ears, and like she would look away or she'd pin her ears, and she doesn't pin her ears at humans. So my first thought was, oh, right, we go to misbehaving. What's wrong? Is she in pain? Like my brain went to this, like, no, she doesn't like this work anymore. She doesn't want to do it. And then I'm like, so I stood next to her and I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, tell them to get on the other side of the fence. So I said, would you, instead of everyone being right next to her, I said, would you go across the fence? Across the fence, still grabbing at her face. I said, take a moment and breathe and see if you can connect with her without touching. Right. And then it was like, you saw her soften and she's, chilling, and they're like, and then the emotion starts coming up for these women. And I asked them later, I said, what came up for you? And they're like, she was really showing us that we can be connected without touch, and we can both be equals in this space. And I said, exactly. I said, ultimately, that divine being is inside of you. That majesticness that you see in her, that beauty that you see in her is in you. And she said that to me. She goes, the beauty they see in me is in them. And I'm like, I know, let's help them get there. But it was such a potent lesson that they'll never, like, them getting to touch her would have been fun. And they're like, oh, I got to scratch a horse. But it doesn't ever give you that inner awakening of like, oh, I am that horse, right? I am those things that horse is. She's not the horse, but I am those things that horse is. That, and it's like, I do that a lot too, because I'm like, Phoenix, I think you're so beautiful. If only I could see myself that way, right? Or if only I could love all of humans as much as I love the horses, I will be fully awakened. That's my journey, is to love humans the way I love horses. That's my journey.
I wish you well in that. I so much for animals most of the time.
Right. Those of us who love animals are like, yeah, but just the animals. So I think that was just so potent that day. And so now I'm like, all right, can you do it next time without pinning your ears? Because that makes me nervous that something else is coming after it. But so she's doing the work, but in a way that is like very obvious, right? As you said, loud before, so it's cool though. It's really cool to see that, because how else are you going to get that? Well, besides reading that in a book, where else are you going to get that? That's in you.
Right.
They just saw it and felt it.
Horses do have that mystery. I think that most people reach out because the horses are so mysterious. I mean, once we know horses better, we understand more behavior, body language, what they need, language. But if you don't really know horses at all, they reach out for that mystery, because the horse is such a mystery to them. And even as a person who's had horses a long time now, I need horses because they draw me into the mystery, which gets me out of all my thinking, out of all my agenda, all the ragging thoughts that go on in my head and in my world. And so it makes sense that people want to reach out and touch part of the mystery, because horses contain all of that mystery that is so compelling to us.
Yeah, so well said. It's so true. The mystery and the miracles. And then we also have the science now. Hopefully we get more and more of it too. We pair it all together, and then we have the whole picture. We have the whole picture of what's going on. We still have far to go on all these categories too.
Yes, we do.
But conversations like this bring us into the mystery, and also help us to understand that we're not alone. Because when I first realized, I thought there was a tribe here. I didn't think there was a tribe of people, or herd of people who understood that there was this element to the horses, right? That we could do things differently. So I'm like super grateful to be connected to people who get that, right?
Me too, right? And that's why I do these conversations, just to kind of gather that energy and that awareness, so that it can grow. Energy grows on its own. I mean, once we start it rolling, then it continues to grow on its own. And that's why I do these conversations, because people all have a different experience of how their horse fulfills their part in their spiritual journey. And we likewise with them. So it's just about gathering consciousness so that we can have a little more breadth and scope to share that with. Okay, well, do you want to tell people how to get a hold of you? And also I will link these into the notes on the YouTube when I post this. But go ahead and tell them now.
That'd be great. Sure. So it's kateneligan.com, where you can find most of my information. And then I'm on Instagram and Facebook as Kate Neligan Equine Coach. And then we have a great group called Awakening with Equines. You also have an awesome group to your north, True North Equestrians,
Mm.
which I love. I think we need more of these groups on Facebook. And then I'm on YouTube as well with Kate Neligan too. So yeah,
And spell your last name.
Neligan.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Kate, so much for joining with me to spread the word about this, to expand our possibility with horse and human. And thank you for joining me. If you'd like more information about my work, it's truenorthequestrians.com. And I will see you in the next Soul Horse conversation.